Well, Marvin, as you know, I'm Drew Parobek. I'm a partner at the Vorys law firm, where I practiced bankruptcy law for almost 40 years, which pales in comparison to your experience. I have been very active in the Bar Association over the years. I was chair of the Bankruptcy Section many years ago. I've been on both the boards of the Bar and the Bar Foundation. I was foundation president 5 or 6 years ago, which was a magical year for me. And I am currently co-chair of the Emeritus Council, which is a group of past presidents of the Bar Association and the Bar Foundation. And we are heavily involved in planning Legacy 150, the 150th anniversary of the Bar Association. And this podcast is part of that.
You know, Drew, I'm Marvin Sicherman, as you know, but I'm listening. I may have a few years in the practice on you because I started in May of 1960. I've got 62 years under my belt. But I'm not going to compete with you with your bar activities. I said, you got me beat all around. Grew up in a wholesale produce business. I had a little bit of an understanding of business. I should tell you, you asked me who has influenced me. My late father, probably as corny as this sounds, was the greatest influence in my entire legal career. My father grew up in what is now Ukraine. It was then Austria-Hungary. In the mountains, the Carpathian Mountains, he was literally a hillbilly. Maybe had a 6th grade school education, came to this country. I understand he peddled scrap in the hills of Pennsylvania for a while. Then he came to Cleveland and ended up in the produce business. And when I say the produce business, like everything else, there's a hierarchy. The immigrants like him were in the lowest class. They handled watermelons, which was terribly labor-intensive. They handled Christmas trees, which nobody wanted to freeze out there for 25 days of December as a wholesaler. They handled wine grapes in the fall. The only customers were the Italians from Murray Hill and Woodland and the Hungarians from Buckeye, called Buckeye. And those were the big customers, and you had a home deliver. I remember backing a truck up to a house in Murray Hill where I didn't have an inch to spare on each side of the back of the truck, that I had to back into a driveway, that I had to climb under the truck. We had to hand the grapes through the window into the basement.
And weren't you about 14 years old when this was
14.
happening?
I had a permit from the state of Ohio. Our councilman was Krizik. Our governor was Lausche, who had been former mayor of Cleveland. My dad called Krizik, who was his councilman. He can't get drivers. It was the end of World War II, basically. And his son can drive a tractor trailer. Why can't he get a license? Krizik called Lausche. Lausche told BMV, I'm told again, test him. If he passes, give him a permit. So I took a driver's test. The first day they had the parallel parking was the day I took it. In a car. Now, why a car is going to qualify me to drive a tractor trailer, I don't know. But I get there and I see what's going on. My dad had to drive me there. He says to me, can you handle it? I said, I'll put a trailer in that thing. So I backed in. And then I went around the corner. I remember the state highway trooper who took me around the corner in the car all of a sudden said, stop. And I refused to slam the brakes on. I hit the brakes, but not an abrupt stop. He said, why didn't you slam the brakes on? I said, I had to look in the mirror to see who was behind me before I did that. He said, all right, you passed. Now, I tell you all of this because my dad drilled into my head, and I wanted to stay in his business. I loved it. I'm outdoors all day. He drilled into my head morality and ethics. Not legal morality and ethics, but business and living morality and ethics. And believe me, that is the best training I ever had and the best preparation for the practice of law.
You know, Marvin, I feel very fortunate because for years now, we get together at least each quarter and have lunch. And I have learned so much. I've learned a lot about the law, but I've learned an awful lot about life and the history of Cleveland and the fascinating life that you've led. I think the last time we got together, you were telling me how your dad, I could say, influenced your decision to go to college. And I think it had something to do with you were on the beach in Florida.
Drew, I was different as a kid. I loved the food terminal. I loved the business. My dad was hell-bent on keeping me out of it because I had a terrible life. I mean, 80-hour weeks were standard. I was 14. I went to work. I had to be at work 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 Monday, Friday, and Saturday, 2 o'clock the rest of the week. Never finished before 4 in the afternoon. So he wanted me out of it. I went to high school. I took college prep. Maybe I want to go. But I had machine shop, auto shop, plastic shop, woodworking shop, metal shop. If there was a shop course, I took it. Got out of school, worked the summer on watermelons. I had a couple $100. I had a friend who was going to University of Miami in Coral Gables. His father had bought him a car. His father told me if I drive down with him, he'd pay for the hotel room till the campus opened up and he could go into the dorm. So I got 2 days in a hotel room in Miami. Yeah, I had a suitcase and me. So I spent 3+ weeks living on the beach. My suitcase was my pillow. I hitchhiked to the University of Miami to shower and shave in the dorm and hitchhiked back to the beach. My dad and mom finally took a vacation, the first one they ever took. They came down to find me in Florida, and they had to call my friend's father for him to get his son to track me down. And my father told me, you could come home with me free. I came home, repacked. I went to Canada to buy Christmas trees. That's what I was supposed to do. Came back, worked Christmas trees. It's now January, looking for what I'm going to do. Maybe I'm going to go to California. I've never been there. Now, bear in mind, this is already the Korean War going. First Tuesday in February, it had to be, of 1953. My dad says to me, we have to talk. I said, well, he says, sit down. Well, I sat down. He says to me, Sonny boy, it's time you make some plans. I said, well, I'm thinking about killing No. He says, here are your choices. You go to school, you go to the Army, you go to work, or you get out of the house. Take your pick. Well, Ohio State starts in March. I knew that because I had some friends there. And he looked at me, and I have no idea how he found it out, and he would never answer the question. He says to me, Western Reserve started yesterday. You have till Friday. My father never bluffed. He was not a card player or a bluffer. I decided I'd go down. Do you know they charged me $5 for a late enrollment and made me take an admissions test? I was shocked. And I still didn't know what I wanted. I'm going to college for what? To go back into the produce business? This doesn't make sense. I don't want to be a dentist. I don't like blood. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be an accountant. That's kind of boring. Oh, well, I go to law school. What the hell? And at law school, I got lucky. The law has been a blessing to me. I did fairly well in the courses. By the way, I wouldn't get into Case Western Reserve today's requirements, and I'm on the faculty there. I know what they're requiring. I would have never made it. But I did well. We had freshman moot court. I did a good job. Lo and behold, the national moot court team lost a senior, and they needed somebody. In my second year at law school, I'm on the national moot court team. Nobody had ever done that before, so I spent 2 years on the moot court team. Good fortune. In the meantime, I befriended a lawyer who was then a student, Pete Pickus. And Pete walks up to me after I'm on the law review, which I didn't even know what the hell it was, pardon my language. He says to me, here's a case. You write a case note on this and you're guaranteed publication. I said, what case? Tony Home Permanent. I said, okay. I didn't even know what Tony Home Permanent was about. Took my friend's advice. I got published, only because Pete Pickus took a liking to me. I got out of law school, and I'm looking around. I say, these guys aren't scholars. This is coming easy to me. And these guys, there's something wrong here. My dad had taught me, the bottom is crowded, the top is wide open. Go for the top. I'm going to go for it. I started out as a solo practitioner. I had a great job out of law school. I got $50 a month. And I was trying lawsuits for a guy who did collection work for the precursors of the credit card industry, the then small loan industry. Sworn in Saturday, May 13, at the Cleveland Bar offices at the Statler Hotel up on 12th and Chester, or thereabouts. I'm not sure it was a Statler. It might have been the backup to the Statler. And on Monday, May 13, I tried my first case sitting first chair. It was quite a shock. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I managed to get through it. And then I moved on. I started practicing on my own. Then I hired an associate. Then I hired another guy. Then I made a partner. Then I merged with another firm. So I merged, and Arthur Dettelbach, who I merged with, died. Sherm Titans got involved in a matter on the West Coast, never to return. Then my nephew Richard, I had a few associates I had hired. Then my nephew Richard Baumgart graduated from law school. I wouldn't hire him. Told me he had to go interview other law firms. I wanted him to see what was out there before I'd hired him. Then after he got done interviewing, I said, now I'll talk to you. Well, you know what Richard accomplished. I don't have to tell you. And candidly, I think I've trained probably half of the bankruptcy panel at one time.
I wonder, Marvin, do you find it astounding that attorneys that practice bankruptcy law are charging close to $2,000 an hour?
Astounding is an understatement. Obscenity is more like it. I mean, I can literally tell you that in the late 60s to the mid-70s, I was the bankruptcy department for Arter and Haddon, Squire Sanders, Calfee, Benish, Con Kleinman, half of Gurin Merritt, which merged into Benish ultimately. That was a wonderful life.
You've been practicing law for 62 years?
62 years. May 1960, my license is still active. I was threatening my wife that maybe after the next biennial I won't keep it going. And she said to me, you're going to give up part of your persona. Don't do it. I owe a debt to the practice of law. The practice has been great to me, Drew. I'm talking about emotionally, psychologically. I haven't done too bad economically, but that's not the important thing. I managed to argue a case in the U.S. Supreme Court. I lost. Nordic Village. They were wrong. I was right. I got a call from the trial judge who had tried the case originally, who wanted to know if she was that wrong. And I said, no, you were right. They were wrong. And she said something to the effect, she was an ardent Republican, that she couldn't believe she would ever be on the same side as something with Stevens and Brennan. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to lobby to have Section 106 of the Bankruptcy Code amended. And she said something to the effect of good luck. It did get amended.
Would you say that's your top career highlight, or do you have others?
No. My personal greatest claim to fame is I coined the phrase negative equity, and I can prove it. I had a case and I had a theory that under the then existing Ohio Retail Installment Act, which got amended 20-some years later because of Dewey Sloan and negative equity, that car dealers could not take a used car into trade and where the car was worth less than was owed, take the difference and add it in as it's part of the sales charges. I waited, I found the right case, and I challenged it in the courtroom with Don C. Miller.
And tell us who Don C. Miller was.
Don C. Miller was one of the four horsemen of Notre Dame and the salt of the earth. I mean, he was just a nice guy. I asked him once, how do you think you do in college football today? And he looked me straight in the eye and said, I wouldn't even make the team. I've got this theory, I've got this case, and I got to win this case. I'm world's worst loser, by the way, and I admit it. I don't lose graciously. And how am I going to win this? You probably aren't even old enough to remember when Warren Guthrie, who was head of the speech department at what was then Western Reserve University, now Case Western, was a Ohio newscaster on the 11 o'clock news. Warren Guthrie taught speech. I took a couple of speech courses. one of which was argumentation. I learned more about philosophy and argumentation and philosophical concepts, including syllogisms, from Guthrie than I learned in a philosophy course. And I figured the way I'm going to win this is a syllogism. And I created a syllogism, but it still wasn't there. I needed a buzzword. And lawyer on the other side said something to me. It was Phil Kasdan and Al Gilman. And Kasdan said something to me about minus equity. I said, that's it, negative equity. I used the term with a syllogism in a brief I filed. Miller ruled in favor of the trustee, who was my client, and used the negative equity term. I don't have my brief. I can't get it out of Washington because they've long purged those records and those files, but Miller's opinion was published. I've tracked it down and found it recently. His ruling was appealed. It was appealed, and the judge who got it in district court was Ben Green. I gagged when I heard it, Ben Green. Ben Green's brother, Jack Green, was the CEO of Progressive Insurance. Progressive Insurance's basic portfolio was what now is a Broadway Auto Mile, was a used car dealers on Euclid Avenue from 55th to about 80th. That was a core insurance business of Progressive. I thought, I'm dead. Ben Green writes an opinion, and I'm summarizing it. It's published. The essence of it is the statute, is read literally, compels the only result possible, which is the case I argued, and I'm right, and then ends it with a paragraph that essentially says he doubts that the legislature ever contemplated its use for the purpose I used it. And kind of a put down to me. I took it that way. And that's when I decided that sometimes appellate courts are not courts. They're legislative bodies. He wanted to legislate but was containing himself. Now that, to me, was my great accomplishment.
Well, negative equity is a term and a concept that probably every bankruptcy lawyer in the country knows.
Every car dealer knows it.
And every car dealer.
And most of the car buyers already know it.
I want to throw out a couple of judges' names and give me a quick summary reaction. How about Jack Ray?
You touch me emotionally. Prelude. You don't get away without stories from me. Before Jack Ray was appointed to the bankruptcy bench, he was not a bankruptcy practitioner. He represented a company its origin was in Lorain County in the auto glass business. And he sent them to the late Howard Sokolsky, and we had a meeting of creditors, and I represented Thermal Pane Glass, a supplier, and the principal of Jack Ray's client guaranteed my client's credit line. So after the meeting, I told Jack Ray I'm going to have to sue his client. He said, well, can't we talk? Our words had import. We talked. We reached a settlement. I think today I'd call it an accommodation. I called my client's treasurer, who said, grab it. I confirmed it in writing. We had a settlement made. We didn't have agreements and documents and all that crap. He offered X. I agreed that my client would take it. He'll send me a check, and I'll get him a release. That's the way we did deals then. Not like today. Point list, a this list, a that list, a this agreement. None of that. In any event, I get a check. It's Jack's personal check. Called him up. I said, I got your personal check. We didn't have IOLTA, but we had trust account. He says, it's none of your business. I said, no. I said, that's not the deal, your client. He says, we made a deal, take the check. Okay, send the check to my client. Its CEO sends it back to me. He didn't approve the deal. He's not taking it. Called Jack Ray up. I told him what happened. He says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm sending him a letter telling him his financial officer made the deal, okayed it. He's either going to live with it or he's got to hire another lawyer, and I will testify against him that it was a firm settlement. I said, I just called you to tell you the check may not clear for a while because it's sitting in my drawer. He said, okay. My client then called his local lawyer in Detroit and told him what happened, and his local lawyer he wanted to file a bar grievance against me because I was threatening to leave. His local lawyer told him I was doing the ethical thing and he better take the settlement. So he reluctantly took the settlement. Called Jack up, told him the check's going to be processed, blah, blah, blah. 2 weeks later, the announcement, Jack Ray's appointed to the bankruptcy bench. I went to his swearing in and congratulated him. And he turned and he looked at me. He says, "Aren't you glad you stood by your ethics and morality?" He says, "Because I'm not going to forget it." And that was the beginning of a very nice friendship.
Marvin, I'm going to throw out another name, someone that I really didn't know, but who I thought was a very special guy, and that's Bill O'Neill. And the reason I thought he was so special is that I chaired the O'Neill Bankruptcy Institute one year. I had not met him. I had not appeared before him. He had been retired by then. But he called me, and he was so gracious that we took the time, myself and Michael Tucker, to put together the Institute, and he was just very pleased and very grateful. And I've always remembered that phone call.
The two of them were the dynamic duo. When we had the two of them on the bankruptcy bench in Cleveland, this was a place to be. As I said, I think I said it earlier, I just was here practicing law at the right time by good luck. And that was good luck, too. And Don Miller on the bench with him. Then Alice Batchelder followed. And we had a dynamic bench here. Good people. Bill O'Neill would surreptitiously discuss with you things and get your birthday. And he'd record it. He called every person he knew on their birthday to wish him happy birthday. When the O'Neill Institute was conceived, he was not too thrilled. It embarrassed him a little bit. He once said to me it was not fair for me to be in his courtroom because I read him. For example, he took shorthand notes. His shorthand notes were as good as any court stenographer's record. And when he got upset with what was going on in his courtroom, he'd start, the door to enter his courtroom was straight in front of him, and above the door was a clock. When he'd start staring at the clock, you knew he was upset, and you knew he was controlling his temper, or as his wife used to tell me, his Irish temper. It was rare, but there were 2, 3, maybe 4 lawyers who could get his goat. But when he got you on his list, you didn't get off. He didn't let you know you were on his list, but he didn't forget. Other than that, the salt of the earth, the bankruptcy practice you have been in, you can credit him and Jack Ray for creating the total element you're living in as a bankruptcy lawyer in this city. When Bankruptcy Section decided to create a scholarship, and it went public less than a month after my late wife had died, I was coerced into going to a luncheon that I didn't want to be at because I didn't want to be with anybody. I was having some difficulty. And Rob Barr and Richard Baumgart basically forced me to come to the luncheon, claiming one of them was going to get an award or something. And I was sitting there really unhappy. And when they started the announcement, I was ecstatic. We're doing something for Jack Ray. And my feelings for Jack Ray were so close as a human being and as a judge that he died when the Cleveland Bar was putting up this memorial plaque in the old mall. And I decided that I would pay for a plaque for me. And I said, if Jack were alive, he'd buy one for himself. So I paid $1,000 for a plaque for Jack because I felt that's what he would have done if he were alive, and I felt I wanted to do that. I should tell you, about a year later at an O'Neill Institute, Bill O'Neill's wife, Ginny, and their son, Tim, were there, and she's looking at the plaque and said, "There's none for Bill." I said, "Well, it's a mistake. There's supposed to be one." Paid another $1,000, got another plaque put up. Didn't want Ginny hurt. Now, but these were people that didn't ask it of you. You did it because you wanted to. You did it out of respect and out of feeling. I must tell a story. Bill O'Neill liked to handle things in chambers. And you could go into chambers and he'd sit with you for an hour or 2 hours letting everybody vent, uninterrupted. He would not interrupt. His mentality was get it all out, and then he'll force a settlement, and it'll take far less time than 2 or 3 days in trial. We're sitting there, and in walks a lawyer who is notorious for being late and who is notorious for having a heavy pencil in tracking his time. And he sits down, and he sits down right next to a guy from what was then Society Bank, now Key Bank, whose name was Bill Fee. He sits down next to him, and I'm in the middle of saying something, and Bill O'Neill interrupts me. He says, "Excuse me." And I'm dumbfounded. What did I do? And he says, "I can't help but observe Fee Bill and Bill Fee are sitting side by side." You got what, 25 years under your belt or more?
Oh, close to 40.
Close to 40. How many judges have you seen who would dare say that or do that?
No, haven't seen that. And Marvin, you were referring to the Sicherman Award, and I was on the committee. I was very proud to be on the committee. The award was given in honor of you and your late wife, Sue, I believe. It is an award that goes to the top bankruptcy students at Case.
Bankruptcy or commercial law. One at Case, one at Cleveland State. They each get $1,000.
I will tell you from the committee's perspective, it was a no-brainer that the award was going to be in your honor and in your late wife's honor. And as I said, I was really very, very proud to be a part of that. And it's an award that's been given out every year, I believe, since its inception. And, believe me, when you're going through law school, every dollar counts.
I'm an adjunct professor at Case's law school. I teach bankruptcy law, of course, 13 years now. And they pay me for it. And guess what I do with the paycheck?
Does it go toward the award?
One half of it to the Cleveland Bar Foundation for the Sicherman Award, the other half back to the law school.
Yeah.
So it's a very profitable deal for me.
It's commendable and not surprising to me, knowing you as I do. I have really one more question I wanted to get into. And between you with 62 years of practice and me with almost 40, we've got about 100 years between us. How has the practice changed?
Well, let's start with the advent of computers. Dramatic change. Electronic filing, dramatic change. The current pandemic, dramatic change. All of those things are called progress. I can live with that. What I can't live with and don't like is the bench lives in a estranged world. They interpret a section of the Bankruptcy Code to prohibit any real socialization with lawyers. I think that's sad. Let me give you an example. I'm going to talk about people now. There used to be a bankruptcy judge in Detroit, Stanley Bernstein. He was kind of a gadfly. Stanley resigned from the bench, went into private practice, then moved to the East Coast, ended up on the bench somewhere on the East Coast, then left there and moved to New York. But while he was on the bench in in Detroit, he wrote a spoof. He wrote an opinion, captioned it In re Narishkeit, which is Yiddish for in re foolishness. And what he basically did is wrote a spoof about a fee application and fee bill allowances by lawyers in bankruptcy. And without names, the characters, you could go into any city in this country. And by the way, I'm proud to tell you I have been in bankruptcy cases in all but 6 courts or 8 courts in the U.S. States. Right. State has more than one court. One court's all I need. And every one of them always has the same kind of characters. I mean, you could close your eyes and sit there and listen to somebody arguing a case, and you could identify him as someone from Cleveland if you're from Cleveland, or someone from Pittsburgh if you're from Pittsburgh. It's just there. And he wrote this spoof. A lawyer in Detroit sent it to me. I found it humorous. I made a copy of it on my 3M copy machine, which needed tissue paper and a developer and a God knows what, and sent it over and gave it to Bill O'Neill. Of course, I had to give him an index of what the terms meant to translate them. Bill O'Neill then calls Stanley Bernstein, and they're having a telephone tag, missing each other. They finally get together, and O'Neill said to Stanley Bernstein that O'Neill's got a problem case on fees, and he understands Bernstein recently wrote an opinion, and he'd like his advice. And Bernstein's going through identifying all the recent opinions he had on fees, and O'Neill finally says, no. Bernstein says, what's the name? Bill says, I think it's Narishkite or something like that. Bill then calls me up. He says to me, he tells me what happened. I said, I can't believe you had time to do that. He said, wait till you hear what he said to me. When I said Narishkite, he said to me, did Sicherman have a hand in this? But this was the way it was. We had summer outings. Bill O'Neill one day at a summer outing, poolside, did 50 push-ups. You knew his family, he knew yours. No improprieties. But today, stay away. It might be impolite. It might be improper communication. I would have tried a case against Bill O'Neill's brother or Jack Ray's brother or their sister in their courtroom. And if I was wrong, I would have lost it. No doubt in my mind. O'Neill's last day before his retirement, I had a pretrial in his chambers. And he said to me, he only remembers 3 times in his entire career on a bench that he ruled against me. He says, you always came in loaded for bear. He's sometimes too well prepared. I said, I'm a rotten loser. I've told you that. No secret.
Marvin, I just have a couple thoughts, perhaps in closing, but I don't want to cut you off from this really marvelous story. One is a quote I wrote down. I think it was from your dad. If you give full value, the customer comes back. Well, you've always given full value throughout your career.
Don't sell something to somebody that they can't use. If it's not the quality that they need, tell them you don't have their quality and let them go to the competition because they'll come back. Sell them something that isn't good enough. They won't pay you. They'll bring back the watermelons cut and you lost the customer.
Right.
That's the lecture.
My second thought is that during our many lunches together, I've told you you need to write a book. And I really hope that you do. I don't think you need an editor, but I'd be happy to serve in that role. But I would like to write the foreword. I hope we can schedule another lunch sometime soon in the new year. And we've been talking for a while about taking our better halves out to dinner. I think we need to make that happen.
Absolutely. And before we end,
sure,
I need to add one more story.
Please do.
The late Bennett Kleinman, founder of, used to be Rocker Kahn Kleinman, Annan, and then became Kahn Kleinman. I'm fresh out of law school. I'm fortunate I get a client. I can't get the client and his business associate's attention. I can't get him back to tell me who's going to be the president, who the directors are, to get a minute book together, get it signed. This goes on for several weeks, and he and his partner end up in a falling out, and I get a phone call, got to have a meeting. We get over there, and I find out, by the way, this lawyer is chewing gum, reminded me of a cow chewing cud. I find out that these guys owe $20,000 in sales and payroll taxes. Lawyer turns to me, and I'm not out of law school 6 months. I'm not practicing law 6 months yet. And it tells me that we had 3 incorporators, me and 2 secretaries in place I officed. We're all going to have personal liability for the $20,000. Drew, I want you to translate $20,000 in 1960. It's somewhere between $1.5 million.
Yeah, big chunk of change.
I don't have $2,000 in cash then. Leave his office. I'm standing on the corner of Superior and 6th, waiting for a traffic light, and it hits me. Bennett Kleinman, he's upstairs here. I'm going to go talk to him. He's a tax lawyer. I didn't know the difference between a tax lawyer of income tax and a tax lawyer of sales tax. I get to his office, and his secretary remembered me because I'd been there once before for another matter. And Bennett comes out, takes me into his office, and I tell him a story. We go all through it, and he tells me, you have no fear, you have no liability, neither does your secretary. The lawyer who you met with should be ashamed of him or herself, and that lawyer had a good 25 years under his belt, for trying that crap. If he knew it was crap, and if he didn't know it was crap, shame on him. I'm thrilled. Pull my checkbook out of my pocket. Tell me how much I owe you. I'll write a check. You don't have to send me a bill. And the answer I got was essentially, put your checkbook back. You're not getting off that easy. If I'm not getting off that easy by paying him fees, and I just got off the hook, I thought for $20,000, what the hell's he going to do to me? And he looks at me, he says, I want you to remember what happened today the rest of your legal career. And if any young lawyer ever comes to you for help and you have the ability to help him, you help him. And then you charge him the same fee I charged you. Tell him what happened here, and that's the fee he has to pay. Drew, you know how many times I've done that.
I'm sure you've helped me more than once, Marvin.
And that, to me, is the epitome of professionalism, taught by Bennett Kleinman.
And carried forward by Marvin Sicherman. What a wonderful way to conclude what I think has just been an enjoyable, fascinating discussion. I look forward to our next one.
Well, if you got another 4 hours, I can keep going.